Welcome, everyone. My name is Harman Brach from ASL Human Capital Management. I work with organizations and HR professionals to help better utilize technology in order to automate processes and increase efficiencies within human resources. I want to first off thank everyone for joining us. We've put this webinar together because we felt that our experience, so mine specifically from an HR technology perspective and David's from an HR strategy side, is fitting in today's business climate. So David will of course start by speaking specifically about Agile performance management check-in strategy. With that said, welcome David, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I welcome everybody joining us. What I want to talk to you about today is Agile performance management check-in. The check-in process is the backbone of this new approach to performance management. So what I want to do is talk about what it is all about and why it works and doesn't work, and why for some organizations it would be inappropriate to actually use it, and for others it would be appropriate with modifications. So hopefully as a result of today's session, I'll give you food for thought on how you can help your organization improve a process which, as we'll see in a few minutes, is universally disliked. A little bit about myself. I started out in education, worked through the educational system in a series of private schools, made it all the way up to headmaster, and then after 2 years of a school here in Toronto, I realized that the school would be great if there were no parents. Parents were the bane of my existence, and I decided to switch careers, got into the field of consulting, which was a natural transition, and still perceive or consider myself more of an educator than a consultant. I work with organizations literally around the world on every continent except for Antarctica and Australia. Hope to be able to get to Antarctica to Australia someday, not Antarctica, and do some work down there. I've been working with organizations on organizational behavior, actually, while I was still in schools, and have transferred that knowledge and learning into the corporate world, private sector, etc. Written 2 books. One, The Talent Edge, is on the whole topic of behavioral interviewing and how to write behavioral profiles. It takes a bit of a different look at what behaviors at work are. And then Inside the Box, which is a series of case studies on leadership and values and the behaviors associated with values, and why it's more important for leaders to live the speech that they make and help organizations be successful. This is a picture of myself with my younger son on my right, that's Gil, and my oldest grandson, Ezra, at the first Raptors game of the season. Probably have to replace that with a picture of the last Raptors game of the season. So why the changes in performance management? We're going to talk about that. We're going to take a look at why feed forward and not feedback. I'm going to explain about feed forward. I can actually might even share with you an exercise you can do with your staff, which is always successful on emphasizing the importance of giving people feed forward and not feedback. What is the check-in process? What goes into the check-in process? What's involved in it? And is the new performance management processes for everyone? This is a cartoon which I always use. You can read it as to what the classic performance management process is all about. It is not necessarily something which is positive, but is often cryptic. I often say there's a lot of great fiction written in performance reviews and on resumes, because managers have a tendency not to tell the truth to their direct reports, and therefore don't actually have an honest report content. So just for yourself, just think about, on a scale of 1 to 4, or 1 to 5 in this case, how is the rating? How honest are people in your organization when they do give feedback? Are they brutally honest, or are they hedging their bets, or they avoid telling the truth? They probably fall somewhere in that spectrum, obviously. The tendency, which you'll see in a second from some international research, is that organizations feel that performance feedback, performance review content is not necessarily based on the most honest of conversations. So how well is your current performance management working today? Obviously, if you are one of the people that showed up for today's brief webinar. You are among the group that feels that it's not working as well, or perhaps it is working and you want some validation that you're approaching it correctly. So on average, most performance reviews are not as honest. And as I said, it's because I believe managers don't necessarily tell it the way it is. They're afraid to confront, or they're afraid of the reaction they'll have, especially if the person has been working in the company for 5, 6, 10, even 15 years, always gotten good performance reviews when they should have not. And now the manager feels that they have to be honest with the person, and they're petrified of the reaction. And why are you the first person to tell me this when I really haven't changed my behavior at all? So there's a lot of apprehension out there about this process. And how many organizations have as part of the performance management process and actually a self-assessment? And what we know from self-assessments is it's a process that never works. The general rule of thumb is this: if I think my boss is not going to give me a good review, or I know that my boss is not going to give me a good review because I really haven't produced the kind of things I should have, what I do is I exaggerate my self-assessment scores. So through the art of compromise, my boss and I can come up with a acceptable number. On the other hand, my boss might rely on me to carry the burden. They might overinflate my scores and therefore justify giving me more work. And I really don't like that. So what I'll do is I'll underrate myself. My boss will overrate me. And then again, through the art of compromise, we come up with an acceptable rating, which is neither honest nor accurate, nor fair to either party, the organization or the individual. One of the things that I've learned in the academic research and also in the practicality of working with people and organizations is one of my desires is people stop using self-assessments. I often find it's a cop-out for the manager who says, let me see your self-assessment, and then builds their review off of the person's self-assessment. If they're having the check-in processes, which we are going to talk about shortly, there's no need for that because the conversation, the dialogue has been going on for 12 months, and it's not a once-a-year event. So to what extent, on a percentage, what extent does your CEO use the formal annual appraisal process with her or his direct reports? In other words, how often does your leader, who sets the tone and example for everybody else in the organization, how often do they actually do what HR or talent management has prescribed as the process? Because if they're not doing it, it gives an excuse to their direct reports to not do it, and so on. It trickles down the line. So here's some research that came from the former Center for Corporate Leadership Council, and now it's CEB. They asked the question, what percentage of reviews would result in a negative impact on performance? So has performance reviews actually had a negative impact on performance? Answer is 3%. So according to their study, performance reviews don't have a negative impact on performance because they're probably not accurate. Next question. A Deloitte survey found what percentage of workers unhappy with the review process? We find 80%. So if 80% of people are unhappy and only 3% think it changes anything or has a negative impact, something's got to give to improve this process. So the same Deloitte study with HR executives, how many say the yearly evaluations are actually useful? In other words, there's a benefit to doing these things. The answer is 2%. So we are actually wasting a whole lot of time, a whole lot of corporate resources on a process which yields no direct benefit and has no positive impact on people actually helping the organization improve, on retention, on engagement, and on all the things that would impact your employer brand, how people see you outside the organization. And how many of the companies surveyed by Deloitte thought the performance reviews were a waste of time? This is an interesting one. Only 6% feel it's a waste of time. So there seems to be a misnomer there, because if it has no negative effect and it's not a waste of time, it should be done. But if we go back one slide, we also find out that 80% don't like it. So what percentage of your employees with high performance review scores are not really your highest performers? Now, this is fascinating. In other words, organizations make a huge mistake on using performance reviews as part of the decision-making process on who's high potential, taking those from the high performer group, but yet only 66% are not on the numbers. Only 33% are actually only high performers. So 1 out of 3 people that are identified as high performers are actually high performers. The rest might be solid performers or even less. And the last one, a Burson survey said, how many companies are reconsidering the performance management strategy? In other words, looking at ways to improve and change it. And we find the answer is 70%. So many organizations are trying or thinking of changing. Not as many have actually changed it as yet or have moved to an agile performance process. And many organizations that have moved to the agile performance process are finding some issues with it. And one of the key issues that they've found, and I've done extensive research on this over the last 5 years, one of the key reasons is lack of face-to-face training with the managers. A lot have relied on e-learning or webinars, only to find that it takes them through the process, but doesn't impact them enough emotionally to change their behavior. And number 2 is most organizations, I believe, have made the mistake of not training the individual contributors on what this new check-in process is all about without really getting into depth on that, because without them knowing sort of what to expect, the whole thing becomes a surprise. And you can put out as many broadcasts as you want on it. If they don't take the time to actually read them and understand it, managers can get away with not doing it or doing it incorrectly. And the last one is, how many executives feel the current review process leads to increased performance or engagement? It's a 50-50. So if people aren't being told the truth, it's not getting increased in engagement. It's not getting increased, therefore, in profitability. And as we talked about, this is a different one. This is a different study. The other study said what percentage actually harms the organization. That was 3%. So what percentage of reviews decrease performance? 30%. So we find that the research is inconsistent, but it does point in a trending direction that we know that performance reviews aren't working. Just to sort of summarize it, what do employees say about it? It's ineffective. It lacks helpfulness. It's frustrating. It's unfair. It's stressful. I'd say it's stressful for both the employee, the individual contributor, and their manager. Both probably lose sleep the night before and stress over this whole process. For managers, it's time consuming. It's frustrating. If you think about your organization and you think about the number of managers you have and the number of direct reports, and if each one of them were spending at the end of the year hours of preparation, hours going through these self-assessments, hours of time, and you multiply that out, you probably are getting no work done the month prior to the formal year-end review. Now, HR has kind of earned some cynicism by its behavior. There are 2 articles two magazines. One came out in 2005 in Fast Company, Why We Hate HR. Fascinating article. If anybody wants it, you can easily access it online or send me an email and I will gladly send you a copy of it. The other is an entire issue in Harvard Business Review, which says HR needs to be blown up and reconstructed. So in the 10 years from the sort of groundbreaking seminal moment in HR where the Fast Company article happened until 10 years later, things, if nothing else, were stagnant, perhaps even got worse, because once people are aware there's a problem, then they're frustrated nothing's being done about it. So you might say prior to 2005, without awareness, everybody it was the elephant in the room. After 2005, nothing seemed to improve. So these survey results, did this ring true? And if it did, then you're not alone. Now, what's interesting here, and I work with companies, I've done extensive work over the last number of years in Asia, Southeast Asia, India, and I always find that when I work there, there are cultural differences. And while many multinationals talk about the fact that there is one global culture, which in many cases there is, there's still an undercurrent of the local current that impacts people. And so it's important to realize that it's the local culture that will also impact this whole check-in process. So let me give you an example. If you've studied Hofstadter's cultural differences, one of the things that he comes up with is distance. In other words, what is the respect level of people towards senior management, and what is the distance? In other words, how are they likely or unlikely to interact? I was recently doing a workshop on this topic in Malaysia and presented there that Hofstadter has, for the Malaysian population, 100% on distance. Canada, it's in its 50s, high 50s. In the US, it's in its mid 50s. So there's a significant difference on how managers will interact based on the local culture in Malaysia with direct reports and vice versa. While in Canada or the US, a direct report might come up with a good idea and present it to a manager. It would never happen in Malaysia, not safely anyhow. And they'd never contradict the boss, even when the boss is wrong. While in North America, they likely are to contradict the boss, either privately or in public. So as many of you might have people who are educated in various locations around the world and wondering why your process might or might not be working, one of the things to look at is, what is the culture that person was educated under? In other words, if through high school, even university, were they educated in North America or were they educated somewhere else? That, I believe, will have an impact on how these check-in conversations go. Keeping with the Dilbert theme, will the check-in end this feeling of the burden of the annual review as a moment of stress or tension? Now, in theory, and from what I have gathered from the research, anecdotal research that is, yes, it does. People actually know. And if the managers are taught how to ask the right questions, the direct report actually feels more engaged. They feel more appreciated. And that's part of the process. And I'll give some questions in a few minutes as to what should the managers be asking to make this process work. So two things that I want to go through first. One is self-talk. One of the problems that we have is that we're all biased. We are not as open-minded as we think we are. We all have our subjective perspective on the world based on our life experiences. And that bias will tell you whether you like something, you dislike something, whether you fear something. It's a natural human phenomenon. How do you identify that bias? I believe is through what I call self-talk. Self-talk is what's happening inside your head before something happens. So you're going to a meeting and you're thinking about every question that you possibly could be asked. You're thinking of every scenario that might go wrong or might need attention. And then you get to the meeting and none of that happens. What have you done? You've created stress. In a worst case scenario, you've actually created a self-fulfilling prophecy. So because you've said it to yourself so long, and because you want to prove yourself right, you're not going to necessarily be as open-minded to somebody else's perspective. So one of the issues in training for the check-in process is to make sure that you raise people's awareness around their self-talk, around that small, still voice that's inside each of us, and make you aware, raise your consciousness, listen to yourself, that am I being open-minded? Am I being fair? Am I being in the moment? Because we all live through the cycle of assumptions. And those assumptions, as I said, are based on our life experiences and get transferred to the next experience, get reinforced, and therefore become stronger. And the stronger those experiences are, the less likely we are to actually listen and hear somebody else giving us a different story. As an educator, I can tell you that, and it's a common understanding, that if teachers tell a student that they're stupid enough long enough, that they're not good at a certain subject long enough, even if the student is good at the subject, they begin to believe they're not and begin to fail the subject. Another student who might be not naturally inclined to be good at a subject is reinforced with positive reinforcement, is given support, is given training, is given tutoring, and all of a sudden they become pretty good at the subject. Why? Because it's, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that prophecy is resulting from our self-understanding of how we interact with the world and has been reinforced over and over again. So one of the things that I ask is, what is the purpose for performance management? When I ask this question at conferences, it's interesting. The majority of people at some point on their list will have because of legal ramifications. So here is a fact. There has never been a case of wrongful dismissal or anything else attributed to talent management that has been decided based on performance reviews. So performance reviews are not going to be the thing that persuades the hearing to go against the organization and for the person, or vice versa. So performance reviews are not as binding or as relevant to the legal issues that we think. The purpose, therefore, has to be defined. And the purpose of performance reviews should not be defined by HR or talent management. The purpose of the performance reviews must be defined by the CEO, with the commitment of the CEO to execute those performance reviews the same way everybody else does. The purpose of a well-defined check-in process is to ensure that there's honest interchange and freedom of understanding what's going well and what can be done better. So should it incorporate? So here's the questions you have to ask your CEO. You have to get an answer to these things, because this will influence your performance review process. Should it be about performance improvement? In other words, the ability to execute the current goals? Or should it be about professional development? Should it be about development within their current role? Should it be simply about skill and knowledge? Should it be simply about behavior? Should it be about a combination of both? And what is that balance? So should performance management focus on managing behavior, building effective working relationships between people, sustaining the success of the business, being focused on those things which are more technical, or supporting and reinforcing the culture and values of the organization, or it should be a combination of all four of these things? That's a question that I can't answer for you. There is no correct answer to that. But once your leadership has made that decision on what is the purpose of performance management, what is the philosophy of performance management, within the context of the philosophy of talent management, it is a lot easier then to formulate the kind of performance management process you want to put in place. So I believe that the best way of conducting a check-in process is by creating true dialogue. Now, I know that it is not something which is often talked about, but here's my problem. In dialogue, I believe this because it enrolls each other in expressing and asking the kinds of questions for clarification that are needed to drive commitment. Everybody drives, we want to drive accountability for people for their commitment to their goals. Well, you can't drive accountability until you get ownership. Coaching and conversations will not get you ownership. Dialogue will get you ownership, where both people come in on an equal footing. Because through dialogue, you're going to get an exchange of information to get a crystal clear understanding of what needs to be done to move forward. And more importantly, you're going to understand why it needs to be done and how that person contributes to the bigger picture of the organization. And understanding how the use of dialogue tools that strengthen relationships and therefore will maximize people's openness to listen to one another and be heard. So there is a difference between dialogue and coaching or conversations or discussion. In discussions and coaching and conversations, issues are typically broken up for analysis and battered back and forth, where the coach will say, this is the way it's got to get done because the coach wants it that way. In a dialogue, you have an open flow of mutual exchange of information. In a dialogue, you get a better chance of getting to why. In coaching and conversations, you usually have a focus when you come into it on a laser focus on what you're going to accomplish. I must say this in order to say that to get to this. In a dialogue, differences of opinions are heard. There's a shared understanding, and actually the outcome might go differently than was anticipated and wind up on a different topic, which is actually the one relevant to being successful. Dialogue, coaching and conversations leave out reflection because they have a process which doesn't allow for it until after it's over. But in dialogue, the reflection happens in the moment and allows people to see each other from their point of view. And as I said, coaching, conversations, they have a defined purpose. And nothing new is created, while in a dialogue, something new might be created. And especially in conversations, you get this tit for tat trade-off, but generation of ownership in dialogue. So apply the ideas to managing through dialogue. There are roles, because it takes at least two people to have a dialogue. Communicate the big picture is the responsibility of the manager. Now, what does that mean? The manager needs to have the person understand how their work makes their department and organization successful. The direct report has to ask questions as to why, so they understand that their goals are important. The manager focuses on success, and the employee is allowed to ask questions. So you see, going back to the cultural difference, geographic cultural difference, asking questions by direct report of somebody more senior in certain environments might not work. It lets each know clearly what is expected of you, their manager. So it's not just, this is what I expect of you. In a dialogue, the direct report also understands what to expect from the manager. So there's mutual support. And ask what the direct report can do to contribute. In other words, there's that ownership. What can you do to make this successful? And conversely, there's an understanding of what the manager will do to make them successful. And you can hold the direct report accountable to their commitments. You ensure the milestones are set. So one of the key issues of the check-in process is I like to break it into 3-month segments. In the first check-in process, you set the year-end goals. And then you look at what needs to be accomplished over the next 3 months that will ensure that you're moving towards that goal on time and accurately, and not waiting until a month before year-end review to get everything done. So you're breaking it down into milestones. The milestones are then checked in at the next meeting, which is started by the direct report reporting back what they've done. It means that both parties cannot make excuses for missing the check-in meeting. And that's where you need the CEO support, because too many managers will tell a direct report something came up at the last minute. And the feeling of the direct report then is, I'm not important. So those check-in meetings have to be sacramental. They have to be set and kept. And if they are not kept, there needs to be, before they're broken, a mutual time set up that people will follow up so they know that it's being taken serious. The manager must provide support, and the direct report must say no to things which are unreasonable. You must allow for mistakes, which most organizations don't do. And the direct report must have the freedom to initiate a dialogue, a check-in prior to the formal 3 months. And therefore, above all else, have questions, not answers. Too many of the coaching sessions, too many of the conversations come in with an agenda and not starting with questions. A good dialogue starts with both parties having questions. This mode, what it boils down to simply is both parties have an equal say in what's happening. Both parties have a stake in each other's success. It also provides an opportunity to give not only recognition, but appreciation for your direct report's contribution. So throughout the check-in process, when you have your dialogue with your direct report, you must be honest. But when you're honest, the best way of being honest is being anecdotal. And by being anecdotal, an example would be my observation at a meeting we both attended was that you did this, and then explain why you felt that was the right thing to do at that moment. Not to come in and accusing somebody, so the human reaction of the person being accused is, who said that? By being anecdotal, you're actually describing a perception that somebody else has of your behavior, allowing the person to respond as to what was their perception and why might there be a gap and what that person can do to change that perception. The other part of a feed-forward check-in process is feed-forward. Feed-forward basically means this. I'm going to talk to you about what needs to be done in the next 3 months. Too many performance reviews are exactly that. They're a review of everything that happened in the previous 12 months that one cannot change. So feed-forward would be a dialogue about those things which need to happen moving forward. Those things the direct report obviously demonstrated that they feel comfortable about, and those things that they need support in doing. So it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, it's an exchange about what will help people be successful, not about catching them doing something wrong. It's about helping them do something right. And one of the best examples I have dates back to my elementary school time when I grew up in New Jersey, and one of the parents in the school was the public relations person for the beer company that was the sponsor of the New York Yankees. So every year during the winter months, we would have a different Yankee come in and talk to us. And it was the year the Yankees lost the World Series because of a bad pitch in the late innings. And Elston Howard, who was the first baseman for the Yankees, came in, and somebody asked him, why did that person throw a pitch that everybody knew that this batter liked? And his response, which I forgot about and a friend of mine reminded me of, is fascinating. The pitching coach came out to the mound and told the pitcher that batter so-and-so really, really likes the ball in a certain position. And Elston Howard said he must have repeated that 5 or 6 times, not to throw the ball to this position. Well, that was top of mind. And guess what? That's where he threw the ball. So it's not about telling them what they can't do or shouldn't do. Feed forward is about making positive suggestions about what you can do and giving them the option of doing it or not demanding it of them, but showing them how the different behavior will actually change the outcomes. So feed forward is a process, which is very important. So the process of holding someone accountable is really asking questions. You begin by asking questions. And the best question to ask is, How's it going? What's happening? The second is discuss solutions, not problems. Too often we focus on the problem. We focus where not to throw the pitch instead of focusing on the solution to make things successful. Resolve concerns. Give people support. Know you have their back. Know that you'll give them the resources, the time, the energy to make it successful, that they're not in this alone. Provide appropriate consequences. Now, consequences is often seen as a word which is negative. These are the consequences you will endure. No, consequences are also positive. What's the positive result? What's the positive consequence of getting this done, of being successful? And therefore gain commitment, not compliance. The person can be like a bobblehead in that meeting with their manager and smile and say, yeah, I'll do it, without any intention of doing it. So that's compliance. I'll do it to the best of my ability. I'll do it because you're my boss. I'll do it because you want me to do it. It's not, I'll do it because it's the right thing to do, and I will do it, and I will take no prisoners, and I own it. Gain commitment. And the only way to gain commitment is to really ask questions about obstacles that might get in the way and follow up and follow through. So if the manager makes a commitment to a direct report and then they don't deliver on that commitment, their next dialogue is going to be an empty shell. So it's a continuous process. And those tools that need to be used, I believe, is the beginning of the first 3-month cycle is create a line of sight. And I'll talk about that in a second, what a line of sight is. They then have to allow a direct report to set their own goals. They have to put guidelines for setting expectations and the importance of setting clear expectations, not ambiguous ones, or not ones that are so clear that it's a pass-fail situation. There needs to be some room in there for manipulation. There needs to set a 3-month milestone. What's going to happen in the next 3 months? To establish mutual times for brief check-ins. Imagine this, if a manager and direct report had a 3-minute check-in every week. How you doing? What's up? Do you need any help? 3 of the most critical questions a manager can ask. The person can say no, but the manager needs to say to that person, these are the things I'm going to talk to you about when I check in with you each week. Otherwise, they do run the risk, and I've seen this happen. They do run the risk of being perceived as micromanaging. And then hold the 3-month planned check-in on time. Don't delay it. Don't postpone it. Make sure it happens, at which point you set the next 3-month goal in order to get to the proper path to success. So here's a summary. A performance framework contains 3 major components: expectations, feedback or feed forward, and growth and development. Now, one of the things we do know about employees, not just millennials, is that employees like to know that they're getting better at what they do, they're growing. It doesn't necessarily mean they want a promotion. Matter of fact, a lot of people don't want a promotion, but they want to know that the organization will help them be successful and move forward. So feed forward check-in. Managers ask a question, what are the 2 things this person does that makes them most effective over the last few months? So the first thing to start the check-in conversation is appreciation. What are the 2 things over the last 3 months that I've observed based on our brief conversations as the month each week, or by the actions that I've seen you take or heard from others? What are things I really appreciate about the work that you're doing? Start with that appreciation. The second thing, bring me up to date what's happening. Because especially if they haven't had the weekly check-ins, what's happening? Allow the direct report to own the meeting, not the manager. Take the burden of performance this performance improvement process out of the hands of the manager and put it on the direct report. Feed forward. What are one or two things that you can suggest to help them be more effective? What can you focus on to help that person move forward? What other comments or observations to assist the person to be successful? It could be around behavior. It could be about skill and knowledge. It could be about a competitive piece of information. How can you add value to this check-in? And any additional comments that either party wants to make. Those are the basic 5 questions or 5 stages of the check-in process. Returning to what I said earlier, this whole thing has to be predicated, I believe, on a performance management philosophy. What are your expectations for performance management? And from that, what are the activities that you expect performance management to cover? Is it going to be about feedback or feed forward? Do you hope to provide your employees with managing behavior, building effective work relationships, sustaining the success of the business, or supporting and reinforcing the culture and the values of the organization? My personal feeling is that last one must be in every aspect of talent management. You need to hire for fit to the behaviors of the organization's authentic values. You need to do your onboarding to reinforce that through stories about living your values. You need to include that in performance management. And the one thing you should never do is promote somebody because they got great results, but violate the values. Because as soon as you do that, promote somebody of that nature, you've sent a clear message to the rest of the organization that your values don't really matter. So without having them embedded in that performance conversation, that performance dialogue, you're not really going to know, except by rumor, whether people are really living those values. Is your philosophy on performance management focused on growth, development, or productivity? So those are the kinds of questions you can use sort of this slide as a guideline, how to have that conversation with your leadership team. So that's a general overview of the check-in process. And Herman, take it away.
Thank you, David. So we'll use the next 15 minutes or so just to discuss technology in human resources, specifically to do with performance management. For those of you that are using technology right now for HR, I hope to provide some insight on how you can use it more effectively. And for those that maybe are not currently using technology within HR, what to look out for when meeting with vendors in order to apply the strategies that David has spoken to. So to start, how does technology help? So first thing is visibility. Visibility is important when setting goals and managing performance. Human resources needs to have visibility into employees and managers need visibility into their teams. So furthermore, employees need visibility into their own information. The great thing about technology is that access levels can be customized to fit the needs of an organization and or a departmental level as well. So visibility also comes in the form of reporting, people analytics, and insights as well. And technology provides a lot of that information, and it can be turned into producing beautiful looking graphs, charts, and spreadsheets as well. So analytics are key in the decision-making process and when trying to build a case for really anything. So when looking at implementing software, whether it's performance related specifically or HR as a whole, you need to make sure that this is something you can manage and customize. Next, we look at accountability. So having a process, for example, for sign-offs to keep each party accountable is important, but more specifically, technology allows to systematically record both manager and employee comments, goals, and next steps. Clearly defining who's responsible for what, setting dates for when these objectives are to be met, and agreeing that these are attainable and realistic. So a lot of the time, the big miss for accountability perspective is when doing this manually, it's lost or forgotten as paperwork is filed away or Excel sheets are saved and filed away in a digital folder and never really looked at again until the next review. Next one is process improvement. So The strategies that David discussed can be applied through technology so that you can provide a seamless workflow. The important part here is to have the ability to customize check-in frequencies and or remove number of questions so it's relevant to each employee and have a process of sign-offs, as we just discussed, to keep each party accountable. Another part of this process needs to be the access piece. So allowing employees to have self-service options to review on demand so that they're able to go back and look at goals and expectations. Having that data available in one place where employees are accessing, for example, pay information, time tracking, vacation, etc., it also helps boost employee engagement. So David spoke about creating dialogue. Technology, in my opinion, really helps create a workflow or a flow of meaning, generating ownership, providing clear view into one's meaning, all the things that David just spoke about. And furthermore, it allows to set mutually agreed upon performance expectations and connect individual objectives to the execution of business strategy. That's really something I took from David's strategy piece that he spoke to. Employee engagement and performance management. I want to touch a little bit upon employee engagement because that is something that HR focuses a lot on in many organizations. So how does employee engagement and performance management relate? Well, 5 out of the top 10 metrics of employee engagement are actually directly related to performance management. First one, the image here is representing recognition. So a large number of employees feel like they don't get enough praise. Feedback. Employees feel like they don't get enough feedback, while some new hires have to wait up to maybe sometimes 3 months before getting any type of feedback from a manager, or feed forward, as David had put it. Personal growth. A lot of employees believe that they don't have any career advancement opportunities, so that's something that's typically important as well. And ambassadorship. So with a lot of these previously mentioned, recognition, feedback, personal growth, employees may not recommend their organization as a good place to work. And relationship with managers. So 1 out of 5 employees feel like their manager maybe isn't transparent with them. So one of the biggest reasons organizations miss on some or all of these is that it can feel daunting and time consuming to manage all of this. So technology allows for a more efficient execution of processes to help grow and scale a business. And human resources, of course, is a big part of that. What we've seen with organizations that we work with is that human capital management software allows HR departments to extend an automated process of managing performance and in order to provide a positive experience for employees and managers as a whole. So HR impacts critical business decisions, and technology will allow you to effectively apply the methods that David has talked about and can be managed in one place with total visibility. As I mentioned earlier, 5 of the 10 top metrics of employee engagement can be addressed through an Agile performance check-in. This leads to an engaged workforce, which in turn means lower turnover, improved employer branding, happier employees, increased internal hires leading to ambassadors of the organization, an open environment with dialogue across teams and functions, and ultimately a great customer experience through an engaged workforce. So before I hand the mic back over to David, my final thoughts. HR has a direct impact on an improved customer experience through an engaged workforce, which translates to increased revenues. So as I said before, human resources impacts critical business decisions. So how you manage the different aspects of human resources is very important, and having the right tools and resources is essential. David?
Thank you. One thing I want to add is that by really creating a better internal employee brand, there's the only possibility to impact your external employer brand. A brand is a reputation. And that employer brand, a lot of organizations are working on your employer brand. People's perception of you as an employer have been formed long time ago when they either experience your organization firsthand or they read about it in the press. So the only way to impact your employer brand is really to focus on your employee brand, and your employee brand is really rooted in your employee experience. That's a really important piece that we just mentioned in how to impact your customer experiences through your employee experience.
I've put up David's contact information as well as mine here. So, if anybody has any questions after the webinar or has some follow-up, feel free to reach out to either David or myself directly. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.